With Venmo Stash, a toggle on one hand and ordering a ride in the other means you're stacking cash back. With Venmo Stash, get up to 5% cash back when you pick a bundle of your favorite brands. Earn more cash when you do more with Stash. Venmo Stash terms and exclusions apply. Max $100 cash back per month. See terms at venmo.me/stash terms.
Adobe Acrobat Studio, your new foundation. Use PDF spaces to generate a presentation. Grab your docs, your permits, your moves. AI levels up your pitch, gets it in a groove. Choose a template with your timeless cool. Come on now, let's flex those tools. Draft, design, deliver, make it sing. AI builds the deck so you can build that thing. Do that, do that, do that with Acrobat.
Learn more at adobe.com/do-that-with-acrobat.
Welcome to Off the Record. I'm your host, Nick. It's good to be seen, and it's good to see you. Off the Record. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend.
True Crime Podcast.
Be good, be kind, and don't little. Gather around, grab a chair, grab a beer. Let's talk some true crime. In 2006, a young medical student stepped into a crowded bar and seemingly vanished without a trace. Brian Shaffer was 27 years old. By all accounts, he was charismatic, intelligent, and standing at the threshold of a promising future. A second-year medical student at Ohio State University, Brian had plans, ambitions, and a spring break trip to Miami waiting just days ahead. But those plans would never happen. On March 31st, 2006, Brian joined friends in Columbus, Ohio, to celebrate the beginning of spring break. The night unfolded like countless others, with laughter, drinks, and bar hopping through the lively campus district. Eventually, the group arrived at a popular student hotspot known as the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Security cameras captured Brian entering the bar shortly before closing time. At approximately 1:55 a.m., surveillance footage recorded what would become the final confirmed sighting of him. Brian was seen casually speaking with two women near the entrance of the bar. He appeared relaxed, calm, ordinary. Moments later, he stepped out of the camera's view, and then he was gone. Despite extensive review of surveillance footage covering the bar's main entrance and surrounding areas, investigators never found a single image of Brian leaving the building. Friends who had been with him eventually exited without him, assuming he had left on his own. But Brian never returned home. He never contacted family or friends. He never boarded his scheduled flight to Miami. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Authorities launched an extensive search. The bar was combed from top to bottom. Nearby construction zones, sewer systems, rooftops, and surrounding buildings were searched. Detectives examined Brian's apartment, his car, his phone records, and financial activity. Everything remained untouched. No signs of a struggle, no indication he had planned to disappear, no confirmed sightings ever surfaced. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Brian had endured personal tragedy. His mother had recently died after a long battle with cancer, a loss that deeply affected him. While friends describe him as resilient and forward-looking, investigators question whether hidden emotional turmoil could have played a role. Still, those closest to him insist Brian was making plans for the future, not preparing to abandon it. Over the years, theories have multiplied. Did Brian slip out through an unseen exit, only to fall victim to foul play? Did he wander into a dangerous construction area and suffer a fatal accident? Could he have deliberately walked away from his life? leaving behind everyone who knew him. Some even speculated about connections to other unsolved disappearances across the Midwest. Though, investigators have found no evidence supporting a serial predator. Nearly 2 decades later, the mystery remains. Some remember his name. Others simply recall the haunting story. A man walks into a bar. Security cameras watch him enter. Crowds surround him. Music plays. Life continues all around him, but somehow he is never seen leaving. To this day, no one knows what truly happened to Brian Shaffer, and his disappearance remains one of the most baffling missing persons cases in modern American history. Over the last 10 years, since True Crime Garage discussed Shaffer's case, we have collected more information. We are now sharing that information in hopes that someone knows something more, and that this information might finally lead to some answers. This is True Crime Garage.
Welcome to True Crime Garage, and the next handful of episodes, we're going to be talking about everything Brian Shaffer. April 1st, 2026 will mark 20 years missing. Since we covered this case 10 years ago, we've been learning a lot of new information and trying to sort through some new leads and rumors. We're going to be joined by Kelly from the Comeback podcast, which is about Brian Shaffer's case. And also she runs the Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive Facebook page. And for the last year, we've been talking weekly, exchanging notes, theories, rumors. And to mark the 20th anniversary of Brian going missing, we wanted to put out the information that we have found, put out the questions that we have, and some of the speculation that we have to maybe help shine some light again on this case and maybe get the case moving in the right direction. I used to think I knew a lot about the Brian Shaffer case. I've learned so much. So if you think you've heard it all about this case, I think you'll be surprised on what we have found. Kelly, could you tell us how you got involved in looking into the disappearance of Brian Shaffer?
So I have followed Brian's disappearance pretty much since the very beginning, but around 2018, it seemed that I had come to the end of information on the internet about Brian. So I reached out to Lori Davis, who is the Shaffer family advocate. And shortly after, we decided that we were going to plan an event for Brian, and we decided on the March for the Missing. It was an event where we would have different families with missing loved ones in Ohio come and set up, pass out flyers for their loved ones, wear t-shirts, just basically raise awareness. After talking to Lori, she introduced me to Nicholas West, who was creating a podcast for Brian called Comeback. After talking to Nick for, I would say maybe about a week, he told me that he needed a co-host. I actually didn't even know what a podcast was at that time. And Nick sent me a True Crime Garage episode of your coverage on Brian's case. And after that, I decided that I could help him. I guess the rest is kind of history. Like, we started doing the episodes and interviewing Don Corbett, Detective John Hurst, Kevin Miles from Central Ohio Crime Stoppers, the Shaffer family. Like, we just kind of got into it and began investigating Brian's disappearance.
Yeah, because most of the people that I've talked to about the Shaffer case, they only have information that's coming from the internet. And one of the things that I really respect about what you and also what Nicholas has done is that you guys actually talked to people that were involved in the case. So I think probably the best spot to start, instead of trying to retell the story that's been told for 20 years, let's tell it as if nobody's ever heard of this story before.
Okay, so I'm going to start at the summer of 2005, and that is when Brian went with his medical school class to Puerto Rico. It was a learning trip, but also a vacation for the students. They volunteered in a lot of different medical facilities and even worked in a couple soup kitchens while they were there. And it actually became a pretty important place to Brian. And he went back and forth to Puerto Rico a whole lot. He was there most of the summer of 2005. And then when he came home from Puerto Rico, that is actually when he met Alexis Wagner and they began dating. The winter of 2005 was very difficult for the Shaffer family because Renee was nearing the end of her battle with cancer and she was in the hospital. And actually, that Christmas, they actually spent in the hospital with her.
So in the Brian Shaffer family, we have Brian, then we have his brother, Derek, we have his mother, Renee, and we have his dad, Randy.
Correct. So that Christmas was actually real special to Brian because not only was it his last Christmas with his mom, but his mom had gifted him a trip to Miami, Florida, which he was to take spring break 2006. She also gifted the same trip to Alexis, so it was going to be like a couple's trip that they took.
A trip for Brian Shaffer plus one.
And then for New Year's, Brian and his friend Clint Florence, who we're going to talk about a lot today, and his friend Matt all went to New York and celebrated New Year's Eve. January of 2006, Brian was pretty much just attending classes and spending as much time as he could with his mom. Brian actually even discussed the possibility of getting engaged to Alexis with his mom. And Renee went as far as asking a doctor friend of hers to refer a jeweler to Brian. With Brian and Alexis both going to be doctors, she knew that it needed to be a nice ring from a reputable jeweler. So Renee did get that referral, and she did give that referral to Brian. In January of 2006, Brian actually also broke the news to his mom that Randy, his father, was having an affair, causing her to change her life insurance, leaving Randy only 50%, and the other 50% was divided equally between Derek and Brian.
Yeah, so just so people are clear, Renee is undergoing treatment. They're not very hopeful that she's going to recover. And in this process, Brian's father, Randy, is having an affair. And that would be a pretty difficult thing weighing on you. Do you tell your mom about this, or do you just not say anything knowing that she's not going to be around much longer?
I actually struggle with that as well. Like, I'm sure it was very difficult for Brian to take that news to his mom.
This is such a weird spot in the timeline for me because while it's pretty factual that this activity was going on, it's, to me, unclear what level of suspicion Renee may have had at the time. Was this, what I love seeing here is, look, good mothers, what they always do, they're always trying to help their kids, no matter their situation. And so putting Brian in touch with the reputable jeweler, trying to help out and work on his future, even though hers seems so bleak, is just such typical good mother action there. And so while that grabs my heart, then my suspicious mind goes to, did she have any kind of idea that something might have been going on? And this is now son returning the favor of, I could sit here on the fence and say nothing and let her go out on top, or I could break the bad news to her and let her choose how we deal with this and what the next action is for her.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I would like to know that too. Every part of my information told me that Brian broke the news to Renee, but I don't know if she was actually having any assumptions before that.
They had a strange relationship anyways. It seems like both Brian's parents were heavily into drinking, and to the point of excess.
Yes, I've heard that a lot, that they definitely like to have their scotch.
Where does this lead to us next in the timeline?
On January 29th, Brian paid $455 to schedule an upcoming test. And it was like a board exam. And when you're in medical school, you have to pass, I believe it's 2 or 3 parts of it. And this was the big one. This was, if you don't pass, you don't go forward. So it was a very big stressor in Brian's life.
Yeah, no soup for you.
In February of 2006, Randy Shaffer gave Brian a check in the amount of $4,500, and the check was made out to the Ohio State University, and that was to pay for some expenses for Brian's next term.
Right. So Brian Shaffer, a medical student at Ohio State, the Ohio State University, and it seems like his parents were paying for maybe not all of it, but they were definitely his financial backers as far as it comes to college tuition and college life.
What's the paper trail on this check here? Because this is something that's occurring shortly after Brian has ratted out his father to his mother. Father has been cut out of that inheritance or insurance.
It's lessened. So instead of getting 100%, he's going to get 50%. But I don't think Randy Shaffer is aware of this at the time.
Okay.
No, actually, so he wrote the check to Brian in February, but Randy actually didn't find out about the change in the life insurance until after Renee had passed away. So he gave him the $4,500 check, and it was never turned in to Ohio State. After Brian went missing, Randy had told a relative that he had wrote the check and then checked his account and saw that it had never been cashed. So the relative suggested to Randy that he put a stop payment on it. So Randy did do that. But I will also say this check has never been found. On February 8th, Brian paid a minimum payment of $135 on his credit card, his Discover card, leaving a balance of $6,746.94. The $135 payment to Discover was paid from Brian's checking account. On the same day, Brian paid the balance in full of his Amazon Visa card, which was $7,387.15. That payment did not come from Brian's checking account or any other account that I have information on of Brian's.
Really, we have no way of knowing where that came from.
No, none at all. So the next day on February 9th, after Brian had just made that minimum payment of $135 the day before on his Discover card, he paid off the entire balance of the Discover card, which was $6,746.94. That money did not come from Brian's accounts either.
So we have an influx of money coming into Brian Shaffer's bank accounts.
Yes, and paying off all of his debt within a little over a month before he went missing. On February 11th, Brian turned 27 years old. And on February 27th was actually the deadline for Brian to turn in that tuition check to Ohio State, meaning that he would not have been enrolled for the next term.
But again, that check that was given to him by his father, that's never been found, and we have no record of it being cashed.
Correct. And as far as I know, there was never an attempt to cash it because it was flagged through Randy's bank that if an attempt was made to contact and let him know. So March 6th was probably the hardest day of Brian's life, and that is when Renee lost her battle with cancer. On the 10th was the funeral for Renee, and they had a lot of guests there, and Randy was playing the saxophone. And while playing the saxophone, he was stalling time because Brian had actually not made it to the funeral yet, and he was close to 90 minutes late before he actually did show up. And when he did show up, tensions were running very high, and there was a shoving match between Derek and Brian Shaffer, and Brian's excuse was that he had overslept.
Right. So you have the mother passing away, losing the battle to cancer. And then you have, which Brian, the speculation has been Brian Shaffer was a mama's boy. So it's odd that he would show up late. And I've seen some speculations on possibly why he showed up late. Do you have any thoughts on why Brian showed up late to his mother's funeral?
I don't have any real reasons why he showed up late, but my guess is Brian was struggling a lot with the passing, and I kind of think it was maybe he got a little too intoxicated the night before and maybe actually did just oversleep.
It doesn't seem like Brian Shaffer was maybe like a daily drinker, but he definitely seems to have a pattern of when he drinks or when he parties, he parties.
He does. Actually, I have spoke to a few of his friends, and they nicknamed him the instigator because he always liked to just tease people, joke around, prank, so they always referred to him as the instigator.
And then obviously this puts his brother Derek in a difficult position because he's like, he knows Brian. So it's like, why are you showing up basically with a hangover to your mother's funeral? I mean, that's disrespectful to her and disrespectful to the family. But at this time in his life, he has conflict. Brian Shaffer has conflict with his father, Randy Shaffer.
And we all this is a cliche, but it is so true. We all grieve very, very differently, and we all have different relationships with people who pass away. It's fair to speculate on this point in the timeline, but it's also, I feel like it's a bit of a fool's errand, I think, because we can't crawl inside his mind. We know he's going to be emotional about the situation. It's one of the most difficult things any one of us could face. So it's, of course, tensions are going to be high because, again, everybody's grieving differently and everybody's having different feelings in that moment. Nobody wanted to be at that funeral. Everybody wanted to be at the hospital the day that she stands up, walks out of the hospital room and rings the bell and says, "I'm cancer free." That's where they wanted to be.
Right.
Absolutely.
So after this shoving match, what happens?
There are really no more details given to me about the funeral or anything else that happened, but I do know that, tensions continue to be there between Randy and Brian, but I do know that that Brian and Derek were talking and were trying to get closer after their mom's passing. So then on March 12th, Brian updated his MySpace page and he stated that his mom is his hero and that he was doing things to make her proud. But he also wrote that this doctor thing was only temporary until he got his band going and was living on an island with his senorita. Then on St. Patrick's Day, 2006, Brian spent St. Patrick's Day with Clint Florence and Meredith Reed. While they were out drinking, Brian and Clint actually got into a little bit of an argument. I don't know the details of that argument, but Meredith had reported it to Columbus Police Department. But it resulted in Brian leaving whatever party they were at and walking to his apartment. And Meredith followed Brian to his apartment, and then Clint followed Meredith. Around this time as well, Brian actually asked his girlfriend, Alexis, to run away with him. And about a week later, after she had said no, he actually told her that she should move on with her life and find someone new because he was struggling with his mom's passing.
Do you know any details about, did he have a plan, or was it just simply, hey, we should run away together?
I don't think that he had a plan. At least if he did, it was never told to me. It seemed more like a fishing expedition to see if she would actually run away with him.
Right.
So March 27th through March 31st was finals week, so he was very busy throwing himself into that. And of course, the last day of testing was March 31st, 2006.
This brings us to the most significant point in our timeline here. The night and early morning in question. This is when Brian Shaffer will be last seen, or his last known whereabouts.
So while the time that Brian was out that night is very important, I took the timeline back just a bit further, and I actually start at 1:20 p.m. on March 31st. And I used Brian's cell phone records and credit card statements and actually Meredith's statement to put this all together. So at 1:20 p.m., Brian called Alexis while she was driving to her parents' house in Toledo. At 1:47 p.m., Alexis returns Brian's call. At 6:45 p.m., Brian called Derek to invite him out to dinner. At 6:57 p.m., Derek returns Brian's call and declines the invite. At 7 p.m., Brian called Clint, but he did not answer and immediately called Brian back. From 7 to 8 p.m., Brian had dinner with Randy Shaffer at Outback Steakhouse in Reynoldsburg, Ohio.
Now, a lot of people think that this is significant in the case because Brian is going on a holiday trip to Miami with his girlfriend. And so a lot of people just view this. Like we said, there's some tension in the family because the mother of the family passed away. And so, and like Nick said, everybody's grieving in their own ways. But the way this is initially reported to people is this is just hey, let's catch up before I go on vacation. But it seems like there might be more to the story than that.
Yeah, it's always been reported, that Brian was worried about Randy, which I'm sure he was, but there was actually some tension that night. Now, while it isn't actually known and it is assumed based on my conversation with Sergeant John Hurst, Brian and Randy actually had an argument that night. Randy was very upset about the life insurance money, and he had a conversation with Derek a day or so prior and told him, your mom didn't mean to leave you that money. You keep $1,000, you give me the other $19,000. So it is assumed that same conversation happened between Randy and Brian that evening. And there had already been a couple other arguments, including Randy threatening to cut Brian off from paying for his education.
Yeah, and I think this gets a little deeper too, because he's inviting his brother out. Brian is saying, hey, Derek, why don't you come with me? You had this confrontation with our dad. I don't want to face him alone, really. And that's possibly why Derek declined to go to dinner with them.
It's absolutely why he declined. Actually, it was reported in the early days of Brian's disappearance that Brian had invited Derek out with him that night to go to the bars and stuff, but that wasn't the case. He invited him to dinner because he didn't want to have dinner by himself with Randy.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Everyone is still just figuring it out. Whether you're single, dating, or in a relationship, we're all still trying to figure it out. February is the month of hearts, roses, and chocolates. No matter where you are on your romance journey, single, dating, or just focusing on you, therapy can be a helpful way to sort through it all. Signing up for therapy with BetterHelp can help you find your way by understanding what you want from a relationship and taking some of the pressure off yourself. BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform and handles the initial therapist matching work for you. Just take a short questionnaire to share your needs and preferences, and thanks to BetterHelp's industry-leading match fulfillment rate, they usually get your match right the first time. You can also feel confident knowing BetterHelp therapists work according to strict code of conduct and are fully licensed in the U.S. Everyone is still finding their way. Find yours and feel lighter. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/garage. That's betterhelp.com/garage. Treat yourself by checking out betterhelp.com/garage today.
With shorter days and packed schedules, it's easy for kids to lose focus. IXL gives them a simple, stress-free way to keep skills sharp and stay engaged without adding pressure. IXL is an award-winning online learning platform that helps kids truly understand what they're learning. Whether they're building math confidence, strengthening reading and writing skills, or reviewing science concepts. It covers math, language arts, science, and social studies from pre-K through 12th grade with personalized, interactive content that adapts to each child's level and pace. IXL is used in 96 of the top 100 school districts in the U.S. It's an easy way to support learning as the school year moves into its most important stretch. Make an impact on your child's learning. Get IXL now. And True Crime Garage listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at IXL.com/garage. Visit IXL.com/garage to get the most effective learning program out there at the best price. So many people are focused on where their money is today. Acorns is the financial wellness app that cares about where your money is going tomorrow. And with the Acorns Potential Screen, you can find out what your money is capable of. Acorns is easy. You can sign up in minutes and start automatically investing your spare money, even if all you've got is spare change. Sign up now and Acorns will boost your new account. with a $5 bonus investment. Join the over 15 million all-time customers who have already saved and invested over $27 billion with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/garage or download the Acorns app to get started. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 2 compensation provided. Potential subject to various factors such as customers' accounts, age, and investment settings. Does not include Acorns fees. Results do not predict or represent the performance of any Acorns portfolio. Investment results may vary. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/garage.
Stop paying too much for wireless just because that's how it's always been. Mint Mobile exists purely to fix that. Same coverage, same speed, just without the inflated price tag. The premium wireless you expect, unlimited talk, text, and data, but at a fraction of what others charge. And this is why I love Mint Mobile. It's the same wireless that I always got. Unlimited talk, text, and data. But guess what? At a fraction of the price. I'm saving roughly around $100 per month. That's crazy. That's $1,200 a year. With Mint Mobile, I'm getting great coverage at a fraction of the price. I couldn't be happier. Ready to stop paying more than you have to? New customers can make the switch today. And for a limited time, get unlimited premium wireless for just $15 per month. Switch now at mintmobile.com/TCG. That's mintmobile.com/TCG. Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, and $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 per month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Over 50 gigabytes. May slow when the network is busy. Capable device required. Ability, speed, and coverage varies. Additional terms apply. See mintmobile.com. Switch now at mintmobile.com/TCG. So do we know how he got to the dinner and how Brian got home?
I have been told that Randy picked Brian up at his apartment, drove him to Outback in Reynoldsburg, and then drove him back to his apartment. Now, I haven't been able to confirm that, but that's what I've been told.
Yeah, and Randy was living in what general area of the greater Columbus
area? Pickerington, Baltimore area?
Okay, so he's going to go way into central Columbus, pick up Brian, and then take him back out east to Reynoldsburg, and then need to bring him back again to central Columbus.
Right.
Which makes some sense if you have stuff that you need to talk about. I mean, it is his son, and there's a lot going on with their family at this time.
You know, myself, I've actually kind of speculated that maybe he didn't know if Brian would show up because of the tension, so he offered to pick him up.
Also, just a pretty normal dad move, I think. Hey, you want to grab some dinner? What time? Sure, I'll pick you up.
Yeah, I agree.
At 8:41 p.m., Brian called Randy. It is unknown what they spoke about. At 9 p.m., Alexis called Brian. At 9:06 p.m., Brian called fellow co-ed Brandon Shatouni. Sometime between 9 and 9:15 p.m., Clint Florence arrived via car at Brian's apartment on King Avenue.
Who's at Brian's apartment at this time?
So I have been told that when Clint arrived at Brian's apartment, that Brian and Randy were there, and that Clint, Randy, and Brian all had a beer together before Brian and Clint walked to the bars. At 9:51 p.m., Brian and Clint are seen arriving at Ugly Tuna Saloona via surveillance footage.
This is not the famous surveillance footage that is all over the internet. This is actually before that time.
Yes, this is the very first time they were there. At 10:03 p.m., Brian calls fellow co-ed Graham Davis. At 10:26 p.m., Amber Ruick and a mystery woman are seen arriving at Ugly Tuna Saloona.
And Kelly, from my understanding, Amber is friends with Clint and Brian. Is that correct?
Amber was a student of Clint's. He was a TA in one of her classes.
And Amber's important to this case because on the surveillance footage that everybody has seen, Brian is talking to two ladies outside of the bar before he goes missing. Those two ladies are Amber and Brighton. So what we're establishing here is when Amber arrives to the Ugly Tuna Saloona.
And we'll go into detail as to what the surveillance footage is showing us as to important persons arriving to the bar that night and then when they are later seen leaving the bar that night. And this surveillance footage, for those of you not familiar with this case, is a camera that is positioned at the top of a set of stairs and escalators. So the Ugly Tuna Saloona is a bar that is on one of the upper floors of a downtown campus building. And there are two escalators to the left. So when you walk into the building, they would be to your right, but from the top of the stairs, this is your left. And that's where the camera is positioned, just above those escalators and then the set of stairs to the right of those escalators.
At 10:40 p.m., Brian and Clint are seen leaving Ugly Tuna. And Brian actually does like a little surf down the escalator with the arms out. At 10:43 p.m., Brian called Matt Ryan and made plans to meet the next day. At 10:59 p.m., Brian called Graham Davis for the second time. At 11 p.m., Brian and Clint arrive at the Short North Tavern. At 11:20 p.m., Brian checked his voicemail even though he had no missed calls. At 11:21 p.m., Jeremy Douglas called Brian. At 11:23 p.m., Brighton is seen arriving at the Ugly Tuna Saloona.
And like we said, Brighton is one of the ladies that was talking to Brian later in the night on surveillance camera.
At 11:45 p.m., Brian and Clint arrive at Brothers Bar.
So this is the third bar that they've been to that night.
At 11:57 p.m., Jason Fistick called Brian. At 12 a.m., Clint called Meredith and invited her out. At 12:30 a.m., Meredith meets Brian and Clint. At 12:48 a.m., the mystery woman is seen leaving Ugly Tuna Saloona. At 1:15 a.m., Brian, Clint, and Meredith are seen arriving back to the Ugly Tuna Saloona.
So this would be the footage that has been all over the internet and news reports. You see to the left is the escalators and to the right are the stairs, and you see Brian, Clint, and Meredith all coming back to the Ugly Tuna, which, again, they were there before earlier in the evening.
According to Meredith's statement, right after arriving at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, Brian basically just kind of disappeared, and then he reappeared a short time later, and he was coming back into the bar from out by like the escalator area that we mentioned where the camera is. Around 1:30, Brian walked away from Clint and Meredith and goes in the opposite corner from the bar's entrance. Again, that's from Meredith's statement. At 1:55 a.m., Brian is last seen on surveillance in front of the Ugly Tuna Saloona. At 1:58 a.m., Brighton returns to the restroom and then joins the group. At 1:59 a.m., Amber, Brighton, and the mystery woman are seen leaving Ugly Tuna Saloona. Closer to 2 a.m. after talking to Clint while sitting at the bar, Clint and Meredith realize that they don't see Brian. They proceeded to walk around the bar several times, even checking both restrooms. At 2:01 a.m., Meredith calls Brian's phone from Clint's phone and leaves a voicemail asking where he is and to call her if he needs a ride. At 2:09 a.m., Clint and Meredith are seen leaving Ugly Tuna Saloona.
So their statements were always, hey, he either said he's going to the bathroom or he's going to talk to the band. They can't get a hold of him, but they know he's a sociable person. He's been talking to people all night. He doesn't live that far from the bar. It's possible that he's leaving with somebody, whether that's male or female, and so they just decide, hey, we're gonna hit the road, and I'm sure he'll be fine.
Well, and we know they walked there, so it's not out of the realm of possibility if you're there with him or even concerned about his whereabouts that you might jump to the idea of, oh, well, for one reason or another, maybe he just started to walk home. The other thing, too, is bars at 2 a.m., 2:30 a.m. are weird, right? None of them seem to operate exactly the same. I'm a bit of a frequenter of many bars and have been in several of the bars that we've been discussing here so far. And from my younger days, when I was out that late, there was a few different scenarios you could run into where they were diehard about getting everybody out exactly at closing time or just before closing time. And then there's other situations where they may not force you out the door right away, but if you get outside of those doors, even though there's people still in there finishing their drinks and conversation, we're not letting you back in.
Right. And to actually add to it, Nick, of what you said, Brian, according to all of his friends and some family members, he had a habit of wandering off towards the end of the night, and they would see him a day or two later. So this was something that he did, so it wasn't out of the norm. And I imagine it wasn't the first time that Brian had done this to Clint.
He goes to the bar with his buddy Clint and Meredith. So can you explain the dynamic of that trio's relationship?
I can. So from what I've been told, Meredith was attracted to Brian and Clint was attracted to Meredith. Well, Meredith and Clint actually began dating, and that night was actually the first night that they were going to spend together.
Through our conversations throughout this last year or so, one of the things I always wondered was, why would Brian and Clint go back to a bar that they already were at earlier in the night? So I always kind of assumed that maybe Brian left a debit card, or maybe he left a hat, or maybe he left a jacket. Maybe he left something. And if he left a hat or jacket, then that would make sense why we don't see him on surveillance footage leaving, because he's now wearing a different outfit. But you have reason to believe that you know why Clint and Brian went back to the Ugly Tuna.
I do. As I've been going through this timeline, I've mentioned a few names that several people probably have never heard of before from Brian's cell phone records. The reason why Brian and Clint went back to the Ugly Tuna the second time that night is actually the reason they had went to every bar they had went to that night. They were trying to meet up with 4 of Brian's other friends, one being a fellow medical school student and a couple others just being Ohio State regular undergrads.
So Brian is a medical student, Clint's a medical student. They're also trying to meet up with this other 4 individuals. And like you said, they're almost chasing them throughout the night to meet up with them.
Correct. And it seemed they were playing phone tag a little bit too. At 2:09 a.m., Clint and Meredith are seen leaving Ugly Tuna. 2:10 a.m. was last call for alcohol. At 2:14 a.m., Clint and Meredith are seen leaving the Ugly Tuna Saloona parking garage. At 2:30 a.m., the Ugly Tuna closes for the night. And at 10 a.m., Meredith drops Clint off at Brian's apartment to pick up his car.
So one of the speculations online has always been that maybe there was a confrontation and that somehow the band that was playing at the Ugly Tuna is somehow involved in Brian's disappearance. You, along with Nicholas West, were able to figure out who that band was, because for years we knew that there was a band. We knew that Brian told people he wanted to talk with them, but we never knew the name of this band.
Right. After talking to Sergeant John Hurst, we were able to find out that the name of the band is Rock House.
And when you guys were doing the Comeback podcast, at that point, I was in conversations with Nicholas West. So when he told me, hey, I know the band's name, I was very interested, because I've obviously played in bands and worked in studios in Columbus. So I figured I'd know these individuals. When he said Rock House, I was actually blown away, because I've played with all 3 of the members, either in bands or on records with them. And so I was able to talk to every single member in the band. They were surprised to know that there's speculation online that they possibly, that the speculation was that they murdered some guy that they didn't even know and took his body out in drum cases. So, first of all, I know all three of these band members, and they're good guys, upstanding guys. It was just another gig to them. They obviously heard, oh yeah, the night that we were playing at the Ugly Tuna, this guy went missing. But none of them were really into true crime, so they just didn't follow the story. They also weren't interviewed or heavily questioned by police, and they all thought that was odd. But where I believe their story, because the bar is like almost like a little square, so you can almost see everybody no matter where you're at in the bar. There's not like these hidden corners or all these things that would obstruct your vision. And so what these individuals told me is, they packed up their stuff like normal, but they had a small crowd of friends there. And so when they left the bar that night, they weren't just leaving with the band. They weren't the last people in the bar. They're leaving with their friends. They're leaving with other patrons of the bar. They're leaving with staff members. And none of these individuals were ever seen on surveillance footage because they took a back way exit.
Yeah, actually, that back way exit they took was actually on camera as well. We just have never seen that footage because it has not been released.
Right. Yeah. And so just to be clear, not only was I able to speak with the band members, but I was able to speak with other individuals that were there to see that band that night. Because like I said, I have several common friends of these individuals. And so it's not just the band telling me this story and going, well, I'm just going to take them at their word. It's a bunch of other individuals that were there that night. And one of the things that was interesting is one of the friends there that night was a guy I played in a band with. His name is Quinn, and he's a great songwriter for the band X-Rated Cowboys. And he did tell me that there was a confrontation between a female friend of his and some guy they didn't know, but he said it wasn't that big of a deal. Quinn also owns a bar, so he kind of knows when something's a big deal and not a big deal. But he did say there was a confrontation, and then that was quickly dispersed, and then they left, and they all left out that back exit instead of going down the escalators.
And just because this was such a popular theory 15 years ago, I just want to point out Brian Shaffer was 6'2" tall.
Right.
Right. I mean, I don't know exactly what equipment they were playing with, but even to try to stuff a male body 6'2" tall into a bass drum case seems very difficult to me. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it would seem to be very difficult to me. And then if you were not able to find something large enough to sneak this person's body or unconscious person out of the bar via service entrance or exit or what have you, now you're talking about dismemberment, and there are obviously no signs of any of that occurring in this situation.
Yeah, and I was able to interview the singer and the bass player of the band. His name is Mark, with Quinn as well. I interviewed them with Maggie Freeling a couple years back, and Mark didn't even really understand, like, why are you talking to me anyways? And I was like, look, one of the number one theories is that you guys had a confrontation with Brian and then put him in instrument cases and took him out of the bar. Well, he stops to look this up online just to see if I'm telling the truth. And like you said, one of the first things that comes up is there's a confrontation and they dismember him. These are guys that obviously can hold their own because they played in bars, so that they've probably been in some tough situations before, but none of these guys are violent individuals. I've played in bands with them, been on recordings with them, never had any conflict with them, never seen them in conflict with anybody else. So you're making the internet with this theory is making these giant leaps it takes a special piece of shit individual to have a conversation with somebody and dismember them. So, but because of Kelly's excellent work and Nicholas West's excellent work, we're able to know who this band was. We're able to question them. We're able to talk to other individuals there. And I kind of think we can stomp out that theory that the band had something to do with his disappearance that night.
Captain, didn't you tell me that it took almost 2 years for CPD to interview the band?
Yes. And it was almost by random accident chance. Some of the members that were in Rock House became another band called the Filthy Habits. And they were playing back at the Ugly Tuna, playing cover songs. And a group of detectives walk in as they're setting up. And the detectives ask them some questions just about, the bar, playing at the venue, how do you enter, how do you leave? And then it comes to the detectives' attention that, hey, well, we were actually in another band and we were actually there that night that Brian went missing. These detectives, for whatever reason, were at the Ugly Tuna and my guess is that maybe it was like turning over the case to somebody. And so, hey, let me take you down to the Ugly Tuna and let's go over some of the stuff that I feel like I've already learned. So they were never properly questioned. And one of the things you see in a lot of the news reports back in 2006 was that the police questioned every individual that was working that night. Well, I don't believe that's true if the band is saying, well, we were never questioned. We were never asked to give polygraph tests. We were never brought in for questioning even afterwards. The only contact that they had afterwards with detectives was two to 2.5 years later when they're just back at the bar and this group of detectives randomly shows up.
I'd like to point out, too, with the timeline, it really doesn't allow for the band theory to even be possible. We knew where Brian was standing up until 1:59 a.m., and Clinton Meredith began looking for him at 2:01 a.m., so I don't really think that the band theory could be possible with the timeline.
Well, and just going from a security standpoint here, we got to keep in mind one thing that is visible in the surveillance footage is two Columbus police officers standing at the top of the stairs. They're not there because the city of Columbus is like, go stand in this building because there's a bar. No, they're hired. Okay, so they're contracted workers by the businesses inside of this building. They're not leaving when the patrons leave the bar. They're leaving after the bar has closed, all operations has ceased, and they are dismissed. And guess what? I can tell you that I know for sure they're not leaving until they're dismissed, because CPD back then, and I know that it doesn't seem like such great pay today because we're now talking 20 years later, but in 2006, they were probably collecting $38 to $40 an hour. In most of these gigs, you're only there in case something happens. So they're considered fairly easy gigs and easy money. And so those officers that were there, they were there until operations and management and everybody was ready to lock the doors for the night.
Yeah, so to believe the band theory, you'd have to believe that a bunch of individuals of the band are in on it, that employees of the Ugly Tuna are in on it, and also security guards that saw other surveillance footage are in on it. You'd have to believe that those police officers that we see on surveillance footage are in on it.
And I don't know what the protocol would have been for this particular location, but typically when we were running security in similar situations, the great reason for having two officers, especially so close to closing time, if you wanted to do things on the up and up, but you were working within a budget, the confines of a strict budget, you would have a police officer there for the majority of the evening, with an additional officer arriving closer to closing time. This gives you the ability to keep an officer inside the building and have one officer escorting workers and management out either to their vehicles, to the parking garage, or a certain distance from the building when they are leaving and exiting for the night.
At this point, we have nobody that has made contact with Brian through his phone. We have no clue where his whereabouts. The last thing, other than people saying that they saw him after the surveillance footage, the only thing that we have as the public is that surveillance footage. And this is kind of how the legend is born. Brian, Clint, Meredith are seen on surveillance going up the escalator. He's seen on surveillance footage throughout the night talking to two ladies. And then he just disappears. A man walks into a bar and is never seen leaving that bar. So True Crime Garage and Brian Shaffer, Dead or Alive, is excited to announce we're doing an event at Brewdog in Canal Winchester, April 18th, 2026. Shaffer, 20 years missing, will be doing a panel where we discuss things that we've been talking about on this podcast and other information that we gather until the event. It's going to happen April 18th, 2026. Brewdog, Canal Winchester. Tickets will be available tonight. The money is going to go to a great cause. We're going to be raising money for the Porchlight Project. And so we hope that you can join us. It will, well, we believe it will sell out fast.
Yeah, a limited number of tickets. Anybody that's been to a previous Brewdog event, you know that there is limited space. So tickets go on sale tonight. Where do you go to get those tickets? You go to our website, truecrimegarage.com.
So come join us and let's raise some money for a good cause in Brian Shaffer's name.
Again, that's in Canal Winchester. That's just outside of Columbus, Ohio. Get your tickets at truecrimegarage.com. Stick around for more Brian Shaffer, 20 years missing.
Hi, I'm Gabby Windy with Long Winded, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm desperate. I'm desperate for your attention in any way possible, so listen to my podcast, won't ya? It has great insights, exceptional humor, and plenty of pop culture to fill your dark souls. And some even say it's a great way to fall asleep due to my soothing voice. And I don't take that personally. Fall asleep. A listen is a listen, even when you're sleeping, and a view is a view, even with your eyes closed. If you dare, and it doesn't take much gumption, enjoy! Listen to Long Winded wherever you get your podcasts.